All right, welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. I have to update my sharing settings. Give me just 1 second. Oh no. Zoom is telling me that I have to quit the program and reopen it. There we go. Okay. All right, so like I said before, if you have any questions during the presentation, it's best to put those in the Q&A section. There should be a bar either at the bottom or the top of your Zoom screen. There's a chat that you can use, but Q&A is the easiest place for me to toggle back and forth in case you have questions. And I'll stop every few moments of the presentation and see if there are any questions. But to begin, let's talk about what the heck is a key experience. So a key experience is something that we have done since the beginning of the school. It is rooted in Montessori pedagogy. It is an experience for students to build community between staff and staff between students and students with each other. So students and staff will cook, travel, camp, laugh, engage with one another over the course of, for the UA, 4 days. In 7th and 8th grade, there are longer trips that go on as well. But it is overnight camping. And it's experiential learning, which is a philosophical idea of you are experiencing something, reflecting on that experience, thinking about it, acting, and then doing another experience as well. So it's rooted in action more than it is maybe more theoretical as it would happen in a classroom. It's also place-based learning for some of our trips, meaning you've been learning about a thing theoretically in a book, and now you're actually going to a place in which that thing existed. Or is being shown in reality. It's something we just talked as a UA staff about why we do this and why we're doing this at the end of the school year after such a tumultuous, hard school year. And it's something universally across all the staff members that we are incredibly excited to be writing to students again. When I talk to students about it and family members and caregivers, it's one of the most impactful things that we do as a school. And it's been on pause because of COVID for a long time. And we're really, really, really excited to be bringing them back. So I'm going to talk about the 3 levels of trips and just give you a very broad overview about what those are. And then we're going to talk about some more specifics as they apply to all of the trips. So the 10th years are going to be attending a place called Philadelphia Community Farm. You may have known it as Buttermilk Falls Farm. It is in Osceola, Wisconsin. We have a quote here from Maria Montessori from the piece Erdkinder. She says, "Education should include the 2 forms of work, manual and intellectual, for the same person, and thus make it understood by practical experience that these 2 kinds complete each other and equally essential to a civilized existence." And that's kind of a big part of this trip. Historically, this trip has been done for 9th graders. So those of you who have been at 9th grade in GRS missed this trip. And so this is an opportunity to go on the trip again, or rather for the first time. So it's focusing on the relationship between humans and land and the importance of physical and intellectual work, and that both of those things are really important. So in terms of activities, students are going to farm. It is a working farm. We're going to cook together, do different community building events, and really just have fun, do different games and be with each other. The leadership on the farm is providing us different programming related to some science things, whether it's around soil or animal care or plant care. We will be tent camping in one location, meaning we won't move our tents from place to place. We will stay at the farm over the course of the 4 days. The 11th graders will be doing the Bodota Trip. Again, this is usually a 10th grade trip in the fall. So those students who missed out on the trips last year, this will be an opportunity to redo that trip. Here's a piece from the Minnesota Historical Society about Bodota. So the confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers is one of the most historically significant landscapes in Minnesota, known to many Dakota people as Bodota. It is a place where rivers and people have come together for at least 10,000 years. This trip builds off of the curriculum in 10th grade. and in history of the Americas. And so many students who were here in 10th grade it'll be sort of a refresher of that curriculum from social studies. And it is very much rooted in place-based learning, things that you may have learned about in a book or videos or audio, you're now going to get to see in person, different sacred sites around the Twin Cities. In terms of camping, students will stay at the Fort Snelling Youth Campsite at Bodota. It's a focus on Indigenous history and futures. Students will visit various Indigenous sacred sites, hike, cook, build community, have fun around that area. And again, like the 10th grade trip, students will camp, will do tent camping in one location, meaning we're not moving from place to place. 12th graders have an option, or they were presented an option. The first option is the Spring Key Experience. It is going to be large group camping at William O'Brien State Park. So again, it's base camping, staying in one spot and not moving from place to place. There will be some canoeing opportunities, some hiking opportunities, games, general community building. A lot of the student leadership, people in that student leadership group are planning some different activities of things that they want to do to sort of as a capstone for their experience. We're partnering with an organization called Wilderness Inquiry. They're a local nonprofit that focuses on outdoor education and place-based learning. And we're doing this, one, because they're a fantastic organization, and two, for our capacity. In terms of planning these trips, they usually are planned over the summer from a GRS staff member. And to plan these trips during the school year while we're still teaching, essentially, we're at much lower capacity in terms of our planning. And so we decided to partner with at least one outside organization to sort of lower our planning and work that needs to get done on the outside. One thing that, because of that partnership, they as an organization require that participants are fully vaccinated, including a booster, to participate on their trips. That is a requirement from Wilderness Inquiry, not from Great River. There is another choice, though, for seniors, and that is the Senior Independent Spring Intensive. We've already, Mari Ruddy, who is the coordinator for this, has already communicated with students and offered sort of a proposal process. These are student planned and led in-state experiences for groups up to 6 students, so 1 student to 6 students. The applications were due April 1st, and information was posted on Schoology, and those required details and family permission plans have already sort of gone through the process, and students who have applied know whether they are approved or still need some details to get those plans approved. Just to give you an idea of what has done, this is something that has been done at Great River, certainly since my time at Great River, so definitely the last 7 years. There have been GSA leadership planning retreats. Students have planned their own camping trips. Students did fishing at local lakes in the Twin Cities, or planning and executing an art project. Because of this requirement in terms of vaccination, if somebody is in a tight spot that they need help planning a senior independent spring intensive, we are willing to have conversations about that. This has been communicated to students, but it hasn't been formally communicated to families. So if you feel like you're in a tight spot and need help with that, we are willing to, but generally the senior independent spring intensive process has already gone through. And so anyone who hasn't applied for that process, we're assuming is going on the large group Spring Key experience at William O'Brien State Park. All right, let's talk now about some things that pertain to all trips. And first and foremost is COVID mitigation. We are still in the midst of a pandemic, and we are still taking COVID mitigation quite seriously. Things have eased at Great River School in terms of masking, but we still want to make sure that these trips are safe and that people feel comfortable being on these trips. The vast majority of time that students are on these trips is outdoors. However, students are sleeping in tents, and there is the transportation to and from the trips. So there is this document here called the UA COVID Mitigation Strategy document that I invite you all to read over in specificity, but I want to give you kind of a highlight of what we're already thinking about. So first off, families and students are encouraged to quarantine the week before the trip. We know that if you're able to quarantine and keep yourself secluded, it reduces the spread. We also encourage you to take a PCR test 4 to 5 days before the trip. So either that Thursday, probably that Thursday before the trip, before we leave on Monday. A PCR test is more accurate in terms of testing for COVID, but we understand that it's becoming harder to get PCR tests. However, we will require all students and staff members to take a rapid test before we get on the trip on Monday morning. GRS has rapid tests available and will be giving students and staff members their rapid test before they leave school on Friday. And then we're asking students and families to test that Sunday night or ideally that Monday morning before they come to the trip, and sending an image of a negative COVID test in order to go on the trip. This does require family permission, or excuse me, let me back up a little bit. If you don't do your own personal test before, we'll have a station set up at school to do the rapid test in which a staff member could administer that. However, for a staff member to administer a COVID test to a student, we do need family permission. And so there's a link right here to a form to give your student permission to have a PCR test, excuse me, not a PCR, a rapid test delivered at school. And that information could be, that permission can be emailed directly to me, akohler@greatriverschool.org. We understand that rapid tests are maybe not as accurate as a PCR test, so we do recommend the PCR test. However, we also do know that a positive rapid test is fairly accurate when I've had conversations with the Department of Health. It's not 100%, but it is fairly accurate. If a student or a staff member does test positive, either from a PCR test or a rapid test before the trip, unfortunately, they will not be able to go on the trips. As I said before, we've eased masking restrictions at school, making masking optional. However, we are asking students and staff members to mask on the transportation to and from the trips. This was a specific ask from UA staff members, just to reduce the risk in terms of being on the trips. So masking will only be required on the transportation to and from. Because we're in an outdoor setting for the majority of our time, masking is optional whenever students are on the rest of the trip. I'll mention it here and then I'll say it again in terms of tenting. So individual tenting is a possibility, and we're trying to make it specific to people who are either students who are immunocompromised or have immediate family members who are immunocompromised. And I'll talk about that in just a second. I'm going to go through this slide and then I'll see if people have questions, or I'll check the Q&A to see who has questions. So to go back to that idea of tenting, tenting is one of the ways that we build community on trips. It's not the only way, but we do know, and we've seen from personal experience, that getting students in mixed group tenting is a way for them to learn how to live with other people and how to share a space with other people. We also understand that's hard after 2 years of being away from other people. That can be a hard and uncomfortable thing, but we do know the benefits of it in terms of social interaction. However, in terms of COVID transmission, we also understand that there are immunocompromised people in our community and that their needs are slightly different. And so students who themselves are immunocompromised or have immediate family members who are immunocompromised, we are allowing them to bring individual tents, ideally like a 1 to 2 person tent, so that they could tent by themselves. In this context, we're thinking about immediate family members as anyone who, upon a student's return from a trip, might get exposed to COVID. That's what we're sort of thinking about in terms of immediate family members. In terms of sharing that information, we are going to be sending out a large sort of survey about a lot of things, including tenting preferences and food preferences and gear needs. And that will be one of the questions, just saying, are you or someone in your family immunocompromised, and do you need to tent individually? In terms of resources, we don't have those. We have some individual tents, but we don't have an unlimited supply, and we would need to get more. We ideally would have people bring their own individual tents, but we understand that's a huge burden. And so if you don't have one already. And so we are trying as best as possible to sort of balance these things. We do have some budget to be able to buy some individual tents, but not an unlimited budget. We'll see where that lands in terms of how many people will actually need it. I did forget to say in terms of tenting, how those groups get decided. We ask students in that large survey that I'll send out at the end of this, your gender identity and your preference for tenting. So obviously gender is a construct in the sense that there are many expressions of gender, but we generally group it into masculine group, feminine group, and then trans/non-binary group. And then we ask those students, what group are you comfortable tenting with? We also ask people, are there any individual students you are not comfortable tenting with, to make sure that we're not setting anybody up for interpersonal conflict that you already know that exists. And then we'll randomize those groups based on that information. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about tenting. I'm going to check there. It looks like there's a question right now. Somebody asked, how many days will the 11th graders be on the Bodota? All trips are going for 4 days, and 3 nights. So leaving on Monday, June 6th, coming back on Thursday, June 9th. Something here. Somebody's asking, can we do a PCR test closer to the trip date? Yes, certainly. That'd be totally encouraged. I think the reason we said 4 to 5 days is simply for, when we were thinking about this beforehand, is availability of PCR tests and being able to schedule those. That ability to schedule them has become much easier. When we were planning this information back in February, it seemed much harder to be able to actually get a, to plan specifically for a PCR availability. So yeah, it is probably more accurate if you do it closer to before the trip. There's one more question. Oh, I did that already. Okay, let's talk about the packing list. So going on these trips does require some specific gear, but not, we don't want anybody to be put out by having to bring, large amounts of gear. So we do have a packing list available. Tents are going to be provided, the group tents, and we'll be grouping in tenting in groups of 3. So that is provided if you're in the regular tent groupings. If there's something on this list that you need that you don't have access to, please let me know as soon as possible, and we can try and get that gear. We want people to be comfortable and have a good time on the trips. And so letting us know sooner than later is really helpful. There are a couple things we want specifically for people to leave behind. The first one is extra snacks. We'll have lots of food on the trip, and if we run out, we'll be close enough to grocery stores that we can pick up more food, but we generally overpack for food. I know that some people have had difficult experiences with food, but we are thinking very much so to have extra food this year. But extra snacks in the tents attracts animals, and we don't want that. And so please leave any extra snacks or personal snacks alone. If there's something that you already have an agreement with in terms of a teacher that you really need a particular kind of food, we'll work that out, obviously. But we just want it to be safe and put somewhere safe so that animals don't get at it. The second one that's going to be harder for us is technology devices. We want all students to leave their technology at home. And we understand that over the course of the pandemic, technology has been a humongous self-soothing device, an ability for us to connect with our friends, connect with people, connect with loved ones, listen to music, calm ourselves down. And at the same time, it's also been a thing that has gotten in the way from interpersonal conflict. We've noticed this at school a little bit. The purpose of the trips, or one of the purposes of the trips, a big one, is to build community within our grade levels. And technology sometimes can get in the way of that. And so we are asking everyone to leave their technology at home. If somebody does bring technology on the trip and it's found out, it will be confiscated for the duration of the trip and returned after the trip. Let's talk about medications. So if a student has regular medications that they take on a daily basis or somewhat daily basis or irregular time, we'll bring those medications to school the Friday before, drop those off, and then we'll take them on the trip. So I'm just going to read the slide as it is. You must bring any medications, prescriptions, or non-prescriptions in labeled original packaging to the medical coordinator, that's Dan, at the front desk before the trips. All medications, including over-the-counter medications, require a doctor's signature as well as the parent guardian signature. On trips, things happen: bumps, trips, falls, scrapes, etc. Great River takes a fully equipped first aid kit along the trip, and all faculty members are trained in first aid. Great River faculty will put Band-Aids on cuts, aloe on burns, and tape up jammed fingers, but we can't legally give children medication without their provider's signed consent. And unfortunately, that does mean ibuprofen and Advil. But you can always, as a family member, give us permission to give those things with this non-prescription release form. So if you haven't already signed that, we encourage you to please sign that and give it to us. And again, you can email that to me or the front desk directly to Dan. Likewise, if you haven't already updated your medical release form, please do that as well so that we know what medications need to go to what students. If a student has an EpiPen that they carry with them, they will be able to carry with that themselves so that it's close to them. And any individual particular needs, just let us know if there's something particular that needs to be worked out. So to give you kind of an overview of the general schedule, how it's going to work, and when things are happening, this is sort of the last week of school as it pertains to the trips. So this is the last week of school that we are doing these key experiences. I don't think I said that at the beginning. So on Sunday, the 5th, we are asking students to do their PCR test or rapid test at home, and then send an image of that negative test to it says here advisor, but it's actually going to be a specific person per those trips. We're going to have that as a specific role to collect that information. Anyone who tests positive, unfortunately, will not be able to go on the trip. It is a huge bummer, but it's also really important to keep everybody safe and reduce the risk of spreading things. Monday morning, you'll arrive at school, and that arrival time will vary dependent on what trips you're going on, but it's roughly an hour before we actually leave, so that we can drop off any last minute medications. If you haven't already, take a rapid test, and then put your gear on the bus and get ready to go. We do ask people to bring a lunch for that Monday morning, and we'll eat our lunch once we arrive to the locations. Then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday morning, we'll be on the trips and stay overnight at those places. Once we get to Thursday, the trips will arrive back at a slightly staggered time. The 12th graders will return at 1 p.m. and the 10th and 11th graders will return at 2 p.m. We'll clean and return group gear. And that evening for seniors is likely to be the graduation practice, but that time is still to be determined. But around, I think, 5 or 6 is probably a good guess. The very last day of school is a half day. And so students will go to their advisory, we'll do some cleaning, we'll do an end of year ceremony, and then we usually have ice cream at the end. And then that Friday evening is senior graduation. And that's the last day of school. So I need to be brutally honest with what goes into making these trips happen. These trips take an incredible amount of work. This school year has been very challenging, to say the least, for many different reasons. To plan these trips at the same time that we are also teaching students is a pretty huge thing for us to do as staff members. We really want to do it, but it's also an incredible task for us. We need volunteers to make this trip happen successfully, make these trips happen successfully. There's going to be a couple volunteer opportunities that will arise. The big things that we really need help with, though, are pre-trip food, pickup, delivery, and organization. And then once students come back from the trip, helping us clean and organize gear. PEG, I'm working closely with the parent engagement group to set up what those opportunities could look like and create sort of a more clear idea of what those opportunities could be. But I just wanted to put it on people's radar that to make these trips run successfully, we need help to make them work well. It's something we really want to do, but we need help to make them run well. So just about wrapping up, I'm going to talk about some next steps and then see if anybody has any questions. So this form right here, this UA Key Experiences Student Info 2022 is a large questionnaire that I'll be sending out tomorrow along with the recording of this video. And that will ask questions about tenting, about food needs, dietary needs, about gear needs, and I think a few other things. But that's essentially your registration for the trip. It's basically saying you're going on the trip and this is all the information that we need. If you are a senior going on the large group key experience, Wilderness Inquiry does have a separate registration that you should also complete. That's so that they have information about the trip. We're asking that people fill this out by May 3rd, which is next week. If you need extension for whatever reason or have more clarifying questions, that's totally fine. But generally the deadline is May 3rd so that we know who's going on the trip and can plan accordingly in terms of numbers for food and numbers for busing and stuff. If you haven't already, please update your medical forms. There's this rapid testing permission form that I mentioned. There is the medical release form that is generally given to people at the beginning of the school year, but if you haven't filled it out or need it to be updated, please do so. And then there's this non-prescription medication administration form, which allows us to give non-prescription medication like Advil and Tylenol and ibuprofen to students. And then start collecting camping gear. Look at your closets to see what camping gear you have and what camping gear you need, and let me know ASAP if you need help getting any of that gear. I think that's all for the information. So I'll open it up now to questions if anybody has any questions that they'd like to have answered in this video. And if you could try and use the Q&A button, it's easier for me to track those questions if you do have them, as opposed to the chat. Oh, somebody said that they have some extra gear that they're willing to share. If they're interested, yes, that would be fantastic if it's something that you're willing to share. I do want to say that the gear does get used pretty hard. So if you're offering personal gear, just know that the caveat that it will be used pretty hard if you're sharing it. But yeah, that'd be fantastic. Somebody asked, where can you find this slideshow? I'm going to be sending out this slideshow along with the recording with all of these links tomorrow via email. Somebody asked a question about what camping gear is needed besides rain gear. So generally we ask people to bring some sort of like working hiking gear, things that you're okay with, like moving around and getting dirty, and then camp gear, things that you're comfortable sort of sitting around camp in. So having like a good pair of boots or a good pair of shoes, sturdy shoes, and some pants and warm gear, at least one warm layer. Hopefully it will be warmer in June than it is right now. Rain gear is really helpful. And then personal toiletries and a sleeping bag and a sleeping pad. Those are the two things that sometimes people don't have access to that we can get access to. The sleeping pad, aside from being comfortable, also provides a lot of warmth. And those are the two things that for the sleeping situation. Yeah. Somebody is asking more about the 12th grade trip. What is Wilderness Inquiry? The facilities for meals and bathrooms. So Wilderness Inquiry is an outdoor organization. They lead camping trips. Their specific mission is to get as many people outdoors as possible. And so they started as an organization working with people with disabilities, and they've branched out to include youth groups and many other nonprofits that they partner with. So their vision and mission is to bring access to the outdoors. So in terms of programming, they're providing us boats and guides, staff members, and also they will be providing some meals for the 12th grade trip and cooking gear. And then sort of like, what's the way to say it? Sort of like camp counselor hangout. They provide leadership in terms of doing group games and different activities. In terms of the facilities for meals and bathrooms, it's going to vary for each trip. Generally, students will have access to a tent. The 10th grade will have access to a porta potty. The 11th grade will have access to a state park bathroom. And the 12th grade will have access to a state park bathroom. There's generally not showers. However, swimming is a possibility for a couple of the trips. That might sound hard, but it is definitely doable. If people are worried about that, I've got a lot of techniques about how to keep yourself clean in the wilderness. In my previous life, was an outdoor educator and led trips for up to 45 days. So it's definitely possible to go a week without showering. And then in terms of food, we ask everyone to bring their own, I should have said this before, their own mess kit, but we'll be providing the cooking gear, and students will actually be doing the cooking on the trips. We'll cycle through, every student will have an opportunity to cook a meal with a group and then also be a part of the cleanup so that it's a shared experience. And the food is provided by school, those meals. And there are always going to be vegetarian options and gluten-free options. And if there are any other dietary needs, we definitely accommodate those as well. But in terms of eating, like where are we going to eat? We're generally going to eat in the outdoors and sit around either a campfire. Some places might have some more seating available, but generally it's sort of like we're going on a camping trip essentially. Somebody asked, how do you know if you need to submit a medication release form and whether or not that was something you completed at the start of the year? Yes, it is something that we ask every family member to complete at the beginning of the year. Some people may have forgotten, or they may have need an update. So it's totally fine if you just want to update it just in case. You can also email me and say, hey, is my medication form up to date, or do you have one for me? And I can double check that as well. Somebody asked how many students are going on the William O'Brien trip. Because it is mixed, there are some students on the senior independent spring intensive and some students going on the large group. It's about a little over, or about 2/3 of the students are going on, at least the way the numbers that I have right now are about, I think it's a little under 2/3 are going on the large group trip to William O'Brien. And then about 1/3 or a little bit more than 1/3 is doing their own senior independent spring intensive. Somebody brought up a great point about tick season. Yes. So ticks are a real thing in Minnesota, and they do bring the possibility of Lyme's disease. So yeah, we do recommend that people bring bug deterrent or wear long pants. And we will talk about tick checks at night and checking yourself before you go to bed, especially because there are no shower facilities. So yeah, we do encourage people to bring bug spray and to wear long sleeves, maybe even being nerdy and tucking your socks into your pants. That's what I do sometimes. I'll give it just a moment to see if there's any other questions. Somebody asked a great question about will there be emergency numbers provided? So staff members, so in case like you needed to get a hold of your student for whatever reason, yes, we will have the ability to, if there's an emergency that you needed to pick up your student for whatever reason, yes, there's a possibility of that. You would have to contact the school, and then the school would contact us is the easiest way that we've found. And we'll provide that information for you. I will say, and I don't think this was necessarily the intent of the question, something that we've also noticed is that it's very good to let students, these trips can be a little bit uncomfortable. We've had the last 2 years where we've been so connected and we haven't gotten used to disconnecting. And that can be really hard. I want to be honest about that. And we've also noticed from students that have struggled with technology and disconnecting that it can be really healthy for them to disconnect. And so even though it may be a struggle, we notice that it's very healthy for those students to have that experience of disconnecting from their phones for a week, knowing that we'll come back and you'll be able to have your phones and your technology afterwards. Technology can be a really fantastic thing, but sometimes it can be a little overstimulating too. And so just keeping that in mind as well. But in terms of emergency contact, yes, contacting the school, and then the school can contact the trip leaders in case there's any emergencies. Okay, I don't see any more questions. If there are, please feel free to submit them. Also, if there are any questions that pop up that you weren't thinking about right now, but you want an answer to them, please feel free to reach out to me or to the school and we can get them answered. As follow-up, I'm going to send out this slideshow along with information about the trip registration and the medical forms tomorrow, along with this recording. And then I will continue to update. I'll probably send a couple more emails as we get closer to the trips about more specific logistics in terms of drop-off and pickup times and other logistics around volunteer opportunities, and also communicating students who are in this presentation. We'll be having more meetings as students, both in community meeting and advisory about what we're going to be doing on these trips, and then also having a couple of days where we'll practice some things like cooking on the stoves, setting up tents, and just being with each other in groups. I do see one more question that came through. Somebody asked a great question. Is expecting the exhausted 12th graders to do a graduation run through the eve they return a good or practical idea? We might be able to find another time to do that. And I am not running graduation, so there might actually be other plans that have changed since that form was made. They will be getting back at 1 p.m. And so there will be time for them to get some rest, but also understand that that's a pretty quick turn and burn from being on a trip to doing graduation practice, which we understand. So we'll try the best we can to get people some rest, but I understand that that is a pretty big turn and burn. Okay, with that, we'll end the meeting. I'll stick around to see if there's any final questions, but otherwise, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And I'm really excited to be offering these trips. Thank you so much.